Don't worry, no one's ever solved this. It's just for fun. Laughter rippled through the room. At the very back row sat a farm girl in a frayed flannel shirt, boots still dusted with dried mud. She didn't laugh. She looked at the chalkboard as though it were a barn gate left unlatched. Under her breath, she whispered, "If the chute's too narrow, the herd will choke." The equation's the same. That afternoon, a single page folded into thirds landed on the teacher's desk and changed the color of an entire department. The morning wind slid through the half-open window like a thin saw blade, carrying the smell of cut grass from the football field. On the chalkboard, white lines curled like reins, tangling in loops, subscripts, arrows that pointed nowhere and everywhere at once. Mr. Holbrook, the substitute teacher, tapped the chalk on the tray with a dry chuckle. "No one here has to understand this. It's a time waster, not homework, just for fun." A soft wave of laughter rolled across the rows. Phones glowed under desks. Someone doodled stars in the margins. In the last row, June Whitaker sat very still. Her hands were still rough from hauling water lines before sunrise. A thin streak of dirt clung to her boots. June didn't hurry. She looked at the equation the way she looked at the east fence after a storm. Not to conquer it, but to see where the wind had slipped through. She bent over her notebook. The stub of her pencil scratched across the cheap paper, leaving lines that sounded like breathing through dry straw. She didn't rewrite the equation. She sketched a trough, then drew narrow gates branching from it, each labeled A, B, C. She erased one, redrew it at a different angle. Every erasure sent a soft cloud of gray over her fingertips. Back in 1954, Holbrook went on, some mathematician tossed this in as a joke. It's lived in textbooks ever since. No one's cracked it fully, so relax. Relax. The word tasted strange. On the farm, relax only came after you'd moved the herd through the narrow bend without panic, after you'd opened the right gate at the right time. Too many cattle in one chute and they jam, kick, snort. To avoid that, you give them a second path, or widen the angle until the flow breathes. Math, if it was supposed to describe order, must have a way to breathe too. The bell rang. Students poured out like startled birds, chatter echoing down the hall. June stayed put. She stared at the final condition written at the bottom of the board, harmless looking, like a wooden latch holding a gate closed. Small, but decisive. "You not heading out, Whitaker?" Holbrook asked, tugging at the zipper of his worn leather bag. June shook her head. "Mind if I write something down?" "Sure, just don't draw cartoons." His footsteps faded into the hallway, carrying the faint smell of burnt coffee. Silence settled over the room, thin and expectant. June rose, walked to the front. She didn't touch the chalkboard. Instead, she pulled out a battered spiral notebook and a pencil so short she had to pinch it between two fingers. Golden light slanted through the tall window, pooling on the desk like warm honey. She began to write. Not quickly, not with any flourish. Each line was careful, patient. She didn't try to solve the problem, she tried to loosen it. In the margin, she scribbled, "Change the frame. Avoid choke point." Beneath that, she drew a simple sketch. A gate slightly offset, letting the flow slide instead of collide. The pencil moved, paused, erased, returned, like testing the boards of a corral until one gives. Then it happened. A quiet alignment in her mind, not blinding, not triumphant, just a subtle click. The way the barn smells different at dawn when you open the door at the right moment, and the whole herd suddenly calms. June wrote a single line and underlined it. Don't force the grid, weave it. She folded the page once, then twice. then a third time until the edges lined up sharp as a fence plank. She placed it on Halbrook's desk next to his empty coffee cup. No name, no explanation, just a folded thought, set carefully like a stone meant to divert a stream. The hallway outside hummed with distant lockers slamming. June stepped into the light and walked toward the bus, boots leaving faint dust prints on the linoleum. Out beyond the schoolyard, a tractor droned, a sound like the pulse of the prairie. That evening, the bus jolted past fields of corn, the last sunbeams catching in her hair like powdered chalk. At home, June shoved the kitchen door open with her shoulder. Her mother was kneading dough, wrists white with flour, the smell of yeast warm and safe. "Anything interesting at school?" her mother asked, the way she always did. June shrugged. "A weird math problem." "Weird good or weird bad?" June thought a moment. "Weird like it could breathe." Her mother smiled. "Just don't let it blow up the barn." They both laughed softly. After chores, tying the north gate, refilling the trough, June climbed the creaky stairs to her small room. Outside her window, the barn loomed like a quiet companion. She picked up a stub of chalk and faced the small blackboard she'd rescued from a yard sale, its surface scratched but still waiting. Last month's marks still faintly visible. Half a fraction, a single arrow. She raised the chalk, paused before it touched the surface, and whispered to the empty room, "I could be wrong, but what if I'm right?" The question hung in the air like a thin thread. She set the chalk down. Somewhere in a brick building miles away, a teacher was unfolding a piece of paper, reading a margin note that said, "Let the condition walk beside, not against." In that moment, something quiet began to shift, like the first breeze before rain, or the first calf stepping through an open gate. Tomorrow, there would still be fences to mend, troughs to fill, chores to finish. But tonight, June allowed herself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, the math would breathe with her. The sun had not yet burned the mist off the pasture when the phone rang. On the Whitaker farm, calls this early usually meant trouble. A sick calf, a neighbor with a broken fence, or the feed truck stuck in the mud again. June's father wiped his hands on his coveralls and answered. His brow furrowed. "Halbrook?" he said, surprised. Then his gaze shifted to June, still sitting at the table with a chipped mug of milk. "For her?" When he hung up, his face was unreadable. "Your teacher wants to see you after school. Says it's not about grades." June's stomach tightened. Teachers didn't usually call farms at dawn unless something was badly wrong. After class, the hallway was empty, lockers yawning open like quiet mouths. Mr. Halbrook stood near the window, holding a manila envelope. "This came this morning," he said. "I passed your notes to a colleague at the university. He read them at 5 a.m. June's fingers gripped the strap of her backpack. "Was it wrong?" Halbrook's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Not wrong. Dangerous. He thinks you might have opened a door that was supposed to stay closed." Before she could ask, a tall man stepped from the doorway. His corduroy jacket smelled faintly of chalk dust and coffee grounds. "Dr. Adler," he introduced himself, offering a hand. "I teach combinatorial systems at the State University. Mind if I borrow a few minutes?" June nodded. Her boots squeaked on the polished floor as they walked to an empty lab. Adler placed a clean sheet of paper on the table, a smaller, simpler puzzle than the one on the board yesterday. "No pressure," he said, sliding the pencil toward her. "Just show me how you think." June stared at the problem. She didn't attack it head-on. She sketched a gate, then a second gate, then drew an arrow that curved around instead of cutting through. "This way the herd doesn't jam," she murmured. Adler leaned forward. "Exactly. You don't force the path, you regulate the flow. He turned to Halbrook, astonished. She sees it before she formalizes it. Then his tone shifted, lower. We'd like to invite you to campus. No tests. Not yet. Just to watch your process. June hesitated. My dad doesn't like cities much. We'll drive him too if he wants, Adler said gently. That evening, her father found her tying the north gate. The wind smelled of coming rain. You think this is worth leaving the herd for? He asked quietly. June nodded. It's just for a day. I'll be back before dark. He reached into the tool shed and handed her a rusted pair of pliers, heavy and cold. Belonged to your granddad. Fixed fences for 70 years. Take it with you. Not to fix their problems, just to remind you which ones are yours. June slipped the pliers into her coat pocket. The weight felt like a promise. 2 mornings later, a university van crunched up the gravel driveway. Adler stepped out, followed by a young graduate assistant with nervous hands. June climbed in, hugging her notebook to her chest. Her father watched from the porch, coffee steaming in his hand, saying nothing. The ride was quiet except for the hum of tires and the occasional cry of a red-winged blackbird in the fields. Relax, Adler said, glancing back. You're not here to perform. We just want to see how your mind works when no one's telling it what to do. The van passed silos, faded barns, then overpasses. Concrete rose where prairie had been. By the time they turned onto the university's brick drive, June's stomach was a knot. Inside, the mathematics building smelled of chalk and old paper. This way, Adler said, leading her to room 3B, a plain room with a wall-sized blackboard. June's boots felt too loud on the tile. You can use the chalk if you like, the grad assistant offered. June picked up a stick, feeling the cool grit between her fingers. She didn't write an answer. She erased part of the board first, leaving one symbol like a lone fence post. Then she began to draw connections around it, not rushing, not for show, just quietly reshaping the corral. Adler and the assistant stood silent, watching. When June finished, she stepped back. The board looked different, not solved, but breathing. Adler exhaled slowly. You see what this means? June shook her head. This isn't a trick puzzle anymore. What you wrote might actually break a constraint that's been holding a whole class of problems shut for decades. He said it like a good thing. But the assistant's glance toward the hallway was uneasy, as though someone might be listening. Will it help? June asked. Adler hesitated. It could open something big, but sometimes when you open a gate, you don't control what runs through. Before June could respond, a shadow passed across the window. A figure paused just long enough to look in, then disappeared down the hall. Adler's jaw tightened. We'll continue tomorrow. Bring that notebook. June clutched it tighter, the rusted pliers in her pocket pressing into her leg. She didn't know it yet, but she had just stepped onto a path that would lead far beyond the farm, and into a system that wasn't ready to let a farm girl rewrite its fences. The next morning dawned cloudless, but June's stomach churned like a thunderhead. The rusted pliers lay heavy in her pocket as the van turned off the highway and into the red brick campus. Inside room 3B, the blackboard loomed like a silent challenge. The graduate assistant wiped the board clean until it squeaked. It's all yours, Adler said quietly. June approached the board like she was approaching a skittish calf. She didn't start with an answer. She erased a corner, leaving a single root equation like a fence post. Then she began building around it. Curves, arrows, constraints turned slightly sideways. She wasn't solving. She was shaping flow. Adler watched, arms crossed, lips pressed together. When she finished, the board didn't look complete, but it looked alive. She just rerouted the choke point, Adler murmured. The whole system breathes. A cough sounded from the back of the room. June turned to see a boy about 16 leaning against the doorframe. His hair was neatly combed, blazer pressed, tie loose like he owned the place. "Sorry," he said. "Not sorry at all. I heard the farm girl was getting a private audience." "This is Preston Vale," Adler said, tight-voiced. "One of our visiting scholars." "Scholar," Preston repeated with a grin. "I heard you like puzzles." "Here's one." He walked to the board and with an easy hand wrote a fresh problem, non-linear, layered, designed to be cruel. June felt her throat tighten, but she stayed where she was. "Take your time," Preston said smoothly. "City kids usually need weeks." June picked up the chalk again. Her first lines were slow, deliberate. She erased, redrew. She didn't break the problem apart. She turned it. She shifted one term to the side, like opening a second gate, then another. By the fourth line, the system loosened. "It's not elegant," she said softly, "but it won't jam." Preston's grin faltered. Adler nodded once. "Exactly." When the session ended, Adler asked her to leave her notebook overnight. As she stepped into the hallway, she noticed a corkboard near the faculty lounge covered in pinned notices and grant proposals. One caught her eye. Project PivotGate, Phase 2, Resource Allocation Model. Principal Investigator, Professor Mallory Pike. Funding Partner, Asterion Foundation. She didn't know what it meant, but the name stayed in her mind. PivotGate. The word sounded like something half-built and half-broken. That night at the farm, the rain finally came, hammering the tin roof. June sat at her little blackboard by the window, copying the diagram she'd made earlier that day. Halfway through, she stopped. The picture of the corkboard flashed in her mind. PivotGate, Phase 2. She wrote the word in the margin and circled it twice. She didn't know yet that the project on that notice board would collide with her work, with her town, and with the very flow of power that ran through the university's veins. But she could feel something tightening, like a gate swinging on a rusty hinge, about to open or snap. The following Monday, June stood outside room 3B, clutching her spiral notebook so tightly the metal coil left crescents in her palm. Inside, the blackboard had been wiped clean again. The graduate assistant was there, along with Dr. Adler and another figure she hadn't seen before. "June," Adler said, "this is Professor Mallory Pike, Chair of Mathematical Systems." Professor Pike was tall, silver hair swept back, her blazer as sharp as her gaze. She shook June's hand, her grip firm but brief. "Dr. Adler tells me you see patterns where others see only walls," Pike said, almost amused. "Show me." June walked to the board. The chalk felt heavier today. She began with the root equation, but this time she didn't stop at just loosening choke points. She drew parallel channels, then wove lines between them, curves that overlapped, spirals that converged, loops that ran beside each other instead of colliding. "This is what I call the lattice loom," she said quietly. "You don't force conditions into a single grid. You let them walk beside one another like threads in a loom. It doesn't solve everything, but it keeps the flow open." Pike tilted her head. Interesting metaphor. But metaphors don't prove theorems. Before June could answer, a slow clap echoed from the doorway. Preston Vale leaned against the frame, smile polished as ever. "Nice art project," he said. "Mind if we try something real?" He stepped forward, took the chalk, and wrote a layered problem. Non-linear, recursive, deliberately cruel. Then he turned to the room. Let's see if the country girl's loom can handle this. June felt every pair of eyes on her. She wiped her palms on her jeans, took the chalk, and faced the board. The first line she drew was slow. The second, steadier. Then she paused, erased a section Preston had set like a trap, and redrew it as a side path, letting the terms slide around the obstruction. By the fourth line, the problem had softened. By the sixth, the recursion stabilized. "It's not elegant," she said, "but it breathes now." Silence. Then Adler exhaled, almost a laugh. "She's right. The loop closed clean." Preston's grin faltered. He shrugged, but the flicker of irritation in his eyes was unmistakable. After the session, Pike lingered behind while Adler and the assistant stepped out. She walked to the board, tracing one of June's curves with her fingertip. "You've got a gift," Pike said. "But gifts need careful framing. Open loops can be dangerous if left unattended." June frowned. "Dangerous how?" Pike smiled thinly. "Sometimes an open gate lets in more than you expect. That's all." She left without another word. June turned back to the board. Something about Pike's tone felt like a warning, but not just about math. On her way out, June passed the faculty corkboard again. The notice about PivotGate, Phase 2, was still pinned there. Someone had underlined the funding partner in red ink. Asterion Foundation. This time, a second note had been tacked beside it. Meeting, closed session, Thursday. Rural Resource Allocation Model. A shiver ran through her. Rural. Allocation. Was this about energy grids? Water access? She didn't know why, but she copied the details into her notebook. That night at the farm, June sat at her little blackboard, drawing loops until the candle burned low. For the first time, the lines felt urgent, as if something beyond the math was pressing in, something that wanted her to stop weaving. She wrote in the margin, "If they close room 3B, I'll just find another board." Then she closed the notebook and slid it under her pillow, as if it were a secret she couldn't risk losing. June was sweeping the barn aisle when the van pulled up again. Sleek, dark blue, its tires too clean for the gravel drive. Two people stepped out. One was Dr. Adler, hat in hand, face calm but unreadable. The other was a woman in a cream-colored suit who somehow did not look out of place against the backdrop of hay bales and weathered wood. "June Whitaker?" the woman asked with a warm, measured smile. "My name is Lydia Rowe. I represent the Asterion Foundation." June glanced at her father, who stood at the barn door wiping his hands on a rag. He didn't say anything, but the line of his shoulders had gone tight. Lydia gestured toward the van. "We'd like to speak with you, both of you, if possible. Nothing formal, just possibilities." They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where bills were paid and seed orders written out by hand. Lydia placed a single envelope in the center. "It's a scholarship," she said simply. "Housing near the university, meals covered, access to labs. You'd be free to develop your work without distraction. In exchange, we'd like to make sure your findings are published responsibly, step by step, in context." "Meaning what?" June's father asked, his voice slow, careful. "Meaning we prevent misunderstandings that could damage markets," Lydia replied. The word markets hung in the air like the smell of ozone before a storm. June looked down at the envelope. Something about the offer felt too smooth, too polished, like a gate swung open not to let the herd through, but to direct them somewhere specific. "What if I want to share my work all at once?" June asked. Lydia's smile didn't falter. "Then you risk chaos. Ideas are like rivers, Miss Whitaker. A little guidance keeps them from flooding the whole valley." Her father cleared his throat. "Or keeps them from watering fields that need it most." Lydia said nothing. The kitchen was quiet except for the faint ticking of the old wall clock. That night, June found her father sitting on the porch steps, the rusted pliers beside him. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "You know what this means, don't you?" June sat down. "They want to help me." "They want something, all right." He handed her the pliers, handle first. "Your grandfather used these to fix gates in the drought of '52. They've held together more than one bad season. You take them with you, but don't let anyone tell you which gate you're supposed to fix." June closed her fingers around the cold metal. The weight was grounding. 2 days later, she moved into a small room above the old math library, a space that smelled of chalk and old wood, the kind of place where thoughts might grow if given enough light. But even there, she noticed signs that her path was no longer entirely her own. A folder marked PivotGate. Phase 3 sat on Adler's desk when she passed by. When he saw her looking, he slid it into a drawer too quickly. And late one evening, when she returned to room 3B, she found the board wiped clean, not just erased, but scrubbed the way you'd wipe away fingerprints. Only one line remained, scrawled in red chalk across the center. Some threads unravel entire systems. June stood in the empty room a long time, the pliers heavy in her pocket, before writing 3 words beneath the warning. Then weave carefully. When she left, she locked the notebook in her bag and didn't look back. Because she knew now, whatever PivotGate was, it had just crossed from theory into her life, and the loom she was building wasn't just for math anymore. It started with the lights. One by one, houses along the road blinked out. The Whitaker kitchen went dark just as June's mother was pulling bread from the oven. By nightfall, the whole valley sat in shadow, the only light coming from distant industrial parks that never seemed to lose power. June and her father lit the kerosene lamp. The smell of fuel clung to the air. "Not the first time," he said, but his jaw was tight. "They'll fix it by morning." They didn't. For 3 nights in a row, the farm was without power. The well pump stalled, the milk cooler warmed, and they had to haul water by hand. June's father missed a delivery because the automated gate wouldn't open. When June finally reached the school library's computer, she pulled up the state grid reports. Something was wrong. Power allocation tables had been shifted, priority rerouted to urban sectors and strategic facilities. Rural nodes were throttled down to minimum survival load. At the bottom of the document was a footnote. Allocation Model V3.1, developed in partnership with Asterion Foundation and PivotGate Project. June stared at the words until they blurred. This wasn't random. It was deliberate. Someone had decided that her valley could afford to go dark. Back at the university, she confronted Adler after class. "PivotGate is pulling power from rural grids," she said, slapping the printout onto his desk. Adler frowned. "Where did you get this?" "It's public data, if you know where to look. And look here, this algorithm," she pointed. "It's the same structure I saw on your desk last week. The same loops I used in my lattice model, only inverted. They're using my pattern to choke the flow." Adler's face hardened. "June, you have to be careful. This project predates you. You didn't give them anything they didn't already have." "But they're using it wrong," she insisted. "They're turning gates into traps." Before Adler could reply, the lights flickered. Then, with a faint pop, the building went dark. Emergency strips lit along the hallway floor, glowing a sickly green. Somewhere down the corridor, a door slammed. Adler grabbed his coat. "Go home," he said. "Now." June didn't move. Her hand had slipped into her coat pocket, fingers closing around the cold metal of her grandfather's pliers. "If they can turn my work into this," she said, voice low. Then I need to unmake it before they lock it down. That night, the storm rolled in. Rain hammered the barn roof, wind rattled the tin siding. June and her father fought to secure the north gate before the herd panicked. Lightning lit the sky, showing the field like a snapshot. The cattle pressed together, eyes wide. When the storm finally passed, June sat on the porch steps, soaked to the skin, watching the last flashes of heat lightning fade beyond the hills. Her notebook was open in her lap, the pages damp and curling. Across the top she wrote in bold strokes, "New plan, break the choke." She began sketching a countermodel, one that would bypass the PivotGate parameters entirely, an open design that couldn't be throttled. But at the bottom of the page, a drop of water smeared the ink. She touched it, then realized it wasn't rain. It was a tear. Because she knew, whatever came next would not be a quiet classroom exercise. It would be a fight, and the prairie blackout was only the first move. The summons arrived as a polite email. Colloquium session. Open attendance required. Room Jefferson 201. Thursday, 4 p.m. June stared at the subject line. It didn't say invitation, it said required. The room was packed when she arrived. Professors leaned against the walls, graduate students clustered near the back. The air buzzed with quiet speculation. At the front stood Professor Pike, hands clasped behind her back, and beside her, Preston Vale, smiling like he'd been waiting for this all week. "Miss Whitaker," Pike said, her tone smooth as glass, "today we'd like to discuss your recent contributions to lattice theory." June clutched her notebook tighter. Preston stepped forward, voice carrying just enough for the room to hear. "Before we celebrate, I think we should first verify authorship. If someone with no formal training can outmaneuver doctoral candidates, we have to ask, where are these ideas coming from?" A low murmur rippled through the room. "Are you alleging plagiarism?" Adler's voice was sharp from the back. "I'm suggesting caution," Preston said, shrugging. "Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary proof." Pike turned to June. "Would you be willing to demonstrate your process here and now?" June swallowed hard. The chalk felt cold in her hand as she walked to the board. Two problems were written side by side, one chosen by Preston, dense and knotted, clearly designed to trip her. The other selected by Adler, simpler but subtle. June took a breath and began. She didn't rush. Each stroke of chalk was deliberate, her voice steady as she narrated, "If you push this constraint straight through, it jams. So I offset it, give it room to breathe." By the third line, the system was already softening. By the fifth, even Pike had stepped closer to see. Preston's smirk faltered. "She's not solving it," one grad student whispered. "She's rerouting it." By the last line, the problem no longer looked hostile. It looked calm. June set the chalk down. "It's not elegant," she said softly. "But now it flows." The room was silent. Then someone, Adler maybe, exhaled audibly. Afterward, Pike dismissed the crowd with a wave of her hand. "We appreciate the demonstration," she said. "But open loops must be contained, Miss Whitaker. Be careful what you untangle. Some systems hold together for a reason." June met her gaze. Then maybe they should hold together for a better reason. For a moment, something flickered in Pike's eyes. Approval? Irritation? June couldn't tell. As she left the room, Preston brushed past her. "Enjoy your little victory," he muttered. "The next one won't be so easy." June didn't reply. But when she reached the quiet of room 3B, she opened her notebook and, with a steady hand, wrote across the first blank page, "Flow must win." Then she drew a single thread looping around the words, turning them into the first line of something larger, a map that would carry her to the next battle. When June arrived at the math building Tuesday morning, room 3B's door was locked. A laminated sign was taped to the glass. Closed for safety review. Access suspended inside, she could see the blackboard through the narrow window. Wiped clean, every trace of her work gone. Not erased, scrubbed. Her chest felt hollow. Footsteps approached behind her. It was Preston, hands in his pockets, that too bright smile back on his face. "Guess the fun's over," he said casually. "Maybe now we can get back to serious work." June turned without answering. The metal of her grandfather's pliers pressed against her thigh. That afternoon she walked to the patch of grass across from the library, a quiet slope under a stand of sycamores. Students passed by, barely noticing as she dropped her bag, pulled out a stick of chalk she kept in her pocket, and knelt. On the concrete, she wrote 3 words in broad strokes. "Welcome to room 215. A few students stopped, curious. June drew a lattice on the sidewalk, recreating the flow diagram from memory. "It's open," she told them simply. "Anyone can add." Within minutes, someone borrowed her chalk and drew an alternate path. Another student knelt to fill in a missing term. A girl with a notebook sketched along, her handwriting neater than June's. By evening, the concrete was covered in loops and arrows, bright white against the gray. Passers-by took pictures. Someone tagged it on social media. #room2115. The next morning, the entire quad buzzed. People stood in clusters around the diagrams, debating, adding, erasing, laughing. June sat cross-legged nearby. Notebook open, copying down the best variations. Adler found her there and crouched beside her. "You're aware this is going viral?" he asked quietly. June nodded. "If they close one gate, I'll open another." He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "You realize you just made this impossible to contain." "That's the point," June said. By evening, Lydia Rowe appeared at the edge of the lawn. Her cream suit looked out of place amid the scrawled chalk and grass stains. "You're putting the foundation in a difficult position," she said softly. June stood, wiping chalk dust from her palms. "You told me to publish responsibly. This is as responsible as it gets. Open, transparent, for everyone." Lydia's expression flickered. Concern, admiration, something darker. "Be careful, June. You're not just drawing math anymore. You're drawing battle lines." June didn't look away. "Then they'd better hold." That night, back at the farm, June stood by the north gate, listening to the quiet after the cattle had settled. Above her, the stars wheeled slowly, patient as they'd always been. She took the pliers from her pocket, held them up to the moonlight, and whispered to herself, "If they erase me, I'll just write bigger." Because room 215 wasn't just chalk on concrete anymore, it was a promise, and the first real opening move in a fight she hadn't asked for, but could no longer walk away from. The storm that night came without warning, black clouds boiling over the prairie, wind howling like a freight train. June and her father fought to secure the north gate, rain slashing their faces. The herd bunched tight against the fence, eyes wide, hooves pounding the mud. When the gate latch slipped loose, June slammed the pliers against it, twisting hard until the metal bent back into place. When it was over, the field was a swamp, the barn roof dripping steady, and the two of them stood soaked and breathing hard. "You held it," her father said, gripping her shoulder. "Gates don't hold themselves," June replied. The next day, Lydia Rowe called her to a quiet faculty office, not Adler's, not Pike's. The blinds were drawn. Lydia closed the door and set an ivory-colored folder on the table. "Do you know what PivotGate really is?" she asked. June shook her head. Lydia slid the folder open. Inside were project memos, resource maps, and graphs showing energy diversion from rural grids to industrial development zones. At the top of the first page, PivotGate, Strategic Resource Optimization, Phase 1 Lead, Investigator, Mallory Pike. June's stomach turned. "She's been starving us on purpose," she whispered. "Not starving," Lydia said softly. "Redirecting. For efficiency. At least, that's what they told the board. But someone inside altered the data. Your Valley's blackout wasn't an accident, it was a test run. And your lattice model gave them a way to make the choke precise." June felt cold. "You knew?" "I suspected," Lydia admitted. "That's why I came here. To decide if Asterion was funding a cure or a weapon. I chose to show you this because you might be the only one who can prove it." June shut the folder. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from something hotter. That evening, as she crossed the quad, she saw Preston standing near room 215's chalk drawings, phone out. He wasn't adding to the work, he was photographing it. "Sending that to Pike?" she asked. Preston didn't even flinch. "She has a right to know what you're posting publicly. Donors need to know if their money's being used for rebellion." "This isn't rebellion," June said. "This is repair." "Looks like chaos to me," Preston said, and walked away. Back at the farm, June sat on the porch staring at the folder. The pages glowed pale under the kerosene lamp. Her father sat beside her, silent, until she spoke. "They're using my work to make the choke tighter," she said. Her father picked up the pliers from the step and handed them to her. "Then loosen it," he said simply. That night, June stayed awake, sketching a new design, a counterloop that would override the PivotGate parameters. She wrote across the top of the page, "Lattice Loom, a field guide to flow, open draft." When she finished, she scanned it, posted it publicly, and pinned it to room 215 the next morning. By noon, students were gathered in clusters, pointing, debating, sharing photos online. When Pike passed by, she stopped, read the first few lines, and smiled thinly. "You're making yourself very visible, Miss Whitaker. Visibility invites consequence." June looked her straight in the eye. "Then let the consequences come." The wind caught her hair as Pike walked away, and for the first time, June felt something break free inside her. Not fear, not defiance exactly, but resolve. Room 215 was no longer a place. It was a signal. And now, the whole campus had seen it. The hearing was held in Jefferson Hall, the largest auditorium on campus. Velvet seats filled with faculty, students, donors. Cameras lined the walls. June stood alone at the front. Beside her was the crate she'd carried all morning, a grain chute model her father had helped her build in the barn. Professor Pike sat at the center of the panel, composed and watchful. "Miss Whitaker," she began, "today is not a trial. It is a dialogue about responsibility. Your open work has stirred unrest. It has also disrupted ongoing projects with significant funding. Do you understand what is at stake?" June nodded. "Yes, that's why I'm here." She set the model chute on the table, poured a handful of dry corn into the top. It jammed halfway, clogging the narrow opening. "This is PivotGate," she said. "Efficient, until the system can't breathe." Then she pulled the side panel open and poured again. The grain flowed smoothly, spilling into the trough below. "This is the lattice loom, same herd, same gate, but it moves because it has room." The room was silent except for the soft hiss of corn sliding down wood. Then a voice spoke from the audience. "She's right." Preston Vale stood, his face pale but steady. "I tampered with the data to make PivotGate look perfect," he said. We were told to align outputs with donor expectations. If we didn't, funding would vanish. I thought it was harmless until the blackout hit her valley. I'm sorry." Gasps rippled through the hall. Pike's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. June looked at the panel. "You wanted proof of authorship. There it is, mine and no one else's. And I'm not taking it back." That night, the university issued a quiet statement. Room 3B would be reopened. But when Adler brought June the key the next morning, she shook her head. "Room 3B was where they erased me," she said. "Room 215 is where we wrote ourselves back." So the quad became a permanent open classroom. The university laid down chalk-friendly pavers, sealed them to last through rain. Students called it the loom. Back at the farm, June found her father repairing the south fence. She handed him back the pliers, still rusted but polished where her hands had held them. "Thought you'd need these," she said. Her father wiped his brow and smiled. "Looks like you fixed a bigger gate." June glanced toward the barn where the herd moved calmly through the morning light. The world had not changed overnight, but the current felt different, wider, freer. Months later, a quiet plaque was mounted near the library, room 215. Open Flow Institute, founded by students who refused to let ideas choke. June never gave a speech. She simply knelt one morning and drew a fresh lattice in the corner of the quad. Around her, others gathered, adding their own lines, building something bigger than any one pair of hands could have managed. Because genius, June realized, wasn't about solving faster. It was about opening the gate wide enough for everyone to walk through. And as the sun rose over the prairie, she felt the gate swing open, this time for good. If June's courage reminded you of a gate you once had to open, a choice you once had to make, then you know this wasn't just her story. It was ours. Thank you for walking through room 215 with her tonight. If this story moved you, please take a moment to subscribe so we can keep building these open spaces together. Leave a comment and tell us, what gate are you opening in your own life right now? Every voice adds another line to the lattice.